into our first panel discussion. Today's panel this is the organizers panel. And the panel features leaders from organizations that have long championed civic inclusion. These groups understand how empowering young people strengthens our democracy, not just for the future, but for right now. I'm certainly excited to hear their viewpoints and why they've chosen to support Vote 16 and how they're helping to build a more representative and resilient democracy. First, I'll let each panel introduce themselves and their organizations briefly, and then I'll ask some questions, and then there'll be a little bit of time for a Q&A at the end. So let's start with a round of introductions. Sure.
Hey everybody. My name is Wilfred. I work as the manager on the Civic Voice and Policy team for Generation Citizen. A little bit about me: I currently reside in Marlborough, Massachusetts. I'm originally from Rhode Island, so New England Patriots fan. And yeah, Generation Citizen, we are a civic education nonprofit. And I'll go into our mission and vision a bit later, but essentially our goal is to expand access to comprehensive civic education to every student in the country, regardless of their background. I'll pass it over to my fellow panelists.
Hello, my name is Laura Baines Walsh. I'm from Brookline, Massachusetts. I'm a member of our town meeting. I'm also an AP government teacher. And in those two roles, I worked with Vote 16 advocates to help pass, well, we had to fight twice in Brookline to get a home rule petition to support Vote 16. The first time it passed, the second time, unfortunately, it failed. But I worked really closely with Charlotte Bishop and others to try and navigate the town meeting system.
Hey everybody, I'm Jordan. I'm a sophomore, or junior now at Harvard, studying government economics, and I'm here as a representative of the Harvard Public Opinion Project, a student organization I run that runs the Harvard Youth Poll, which is the nation's largest and longest running survey of 18 to 29-year-olds nationally. So not inclusive of 16 and 17-year-olds yet, but hopefully we can get there, and always looking for more ways to understand and mobilize young people to be involved in politics.
Hi, I'm Anne-Mara Lanza, and I'm from Wellesley. I am on the steering committee for the League of Women Voters of Wellesley. I'm currently a town meeting member, and I'm a former member of the select board in Wellesley, which is our similar to a mayor, or similar to a mayor. So we're the town form of government. I also served as a library trustee for many years, which is also an elected official. So I've been involved in town politics for a while.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for those great introductions. We're going to start with our first question. Some questions I'll address to specific members of the panel, just in terms of time and how the question is asked. So this one is for all of you. Can you all share what personally motivates you to support extending voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds? Anyone can start.
So I do want to mention, so the League of Women Voters, we support issues always based on a thorough study of the issue, the pros and the cons. And so the League of Women Voters of the United States and of Massachusetts have not studied this issue, so they don't have a position. The League of Women Voters of Maine does. So I'm definitely going to speak personally. So why do I think this is important? I personally, it's really a lot of reasons. I think the first one is that I believe that, and one mentioned this earlier, the youth are, all the issues that we face today, who has the biggest stake in that? It's our youth. And I want to know what you all think are the solutions to those issues. I sort of feel like my generation, my son tells me all the time, my generation has messed things up. I actually blame my parents' generation. I'm kind of tired of seeing what old people think they should do. I think we need younger voices. I also believe that civic engagement is really the core of making our democracy work. We need people to be involved. And if you allow young people to vote while they're still at home, before they've gone off and gotten involved in college or the workforce, you're going to create a habit, a lifelong habit of voting and civic engagement. And I guess the third thing I want to say is that I've seen it in action. In Wellesley, our town meeting, to be a member of our town meeting, anyone can run as you're a resident, regardless of age. And several years ago, one of our youth figured this out, happens to be in the back of the room right now, and he became our first youth member of town meeting. Since then, we've always had a handful of teen town meeting members, and which I think is great. Well, the first, Michael in the back, when he learned this, he has gone on to go to law school, to come back to town and be an elected member of our school committee, and is currently an elected member of our Natural Resources Commission. So that's what happens when you let youth get involved. They stay involved.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty similar story for me, really grounded in some of the data that I've seen over the past couple of years while working on a youth poll, and it's that young people in America really face this massive crisis of civic engagement and also disillusionment with the government. And in our most recent spring 2025 poll, we found really 3 findings that all fit together in a way that was really deeply disturbing to me. The first of which is, of course, the young people are financially struggling. Only about 16% feel like they're comfortable. Add that to the fact that only about 17% feel a strong sense of community in their everyday lives. And what should be the solution, right? Government should be something they can turn to fix this. Only 15% see the country is headed in the right direction. They don't trust Democrats, they don't trust Republicans. And so as a result of this, a lot of young people, don't turn out to vote, even once they have that right at age 18 and above. And so anything we can do, whether it's lowering the voting age to get people involved in this process earlier or encouraging them to be more civically engaged in the classroom, I think is absolutely critical to try and fix that problem as early as possible. Get people to believe that, government might not be perfect, but perhaps if I engage with that system, I can start to change early and then form those civic habits that you talked about for the rest of each of our lives. So for me personally, it's really seeing just how big of a crisis we're up against and how wonderful it is to have young people like everyone in this room being out here and doing the work and being civically engaged, because if we can do that for, not just all of the wonderful organizers here, but a whole generation of young people like us, then that's how we actually make the change moving forward.
I think I would like to echo what those ahead of me said. As an AP government teacher, I spend every day telling my students how important it is to be involved. That, to quote the West Wing, decisions are made by those who show up. And despite, this knowledge that it's people who vote who get to set the policy directions, right? If people don't show up, their candidates lose, and then nobody cares what they think anymore. Despite people knowing that, our election rates in municipal town elections are pathetic. In May of 2025, 23.17% of Brookline showed up, and we were voting for town meeting, select board, which is like a council of mayors, school committee. It was all of these were contested, and yet people stayed home on the couch. And knowing that our young people are so incredibly smart and talented, and as Juan pointed out, the ones who are going to have to live with the consequences of the policy made today, I think we need more engagement. And if we can teach them to do it at a young age, when oftentimes the polling stations are in their schools, so access is going to be as easy as it's ever going to be, I think it's worth doing.
I'm trying to follow that up. Yeah, no, I think for me, I think similar to LaVon, I think about my own experience at 16 years old. I was somebody who was very engaged within my own city and my state. I was part of the Providence Student Union. We were marching and parading up and down. But I also think at that same time, I by the time I turned 16, I had already worked my first job. By the time I turned 17, I had already worked my third job. I was paying taxes, I was contributing to Social Security and Medicare. Again, I had feelings about and motivation, I was motivated about certain issues, but didn't have a place to, really express that besides, within my own classroom or amongst my own peers. But to me, and this is speaking as Wilford and not a representative generation citizen, I see it as a labor issue, right? Like your 16-year-olds you can work as young as 14-year-olds in some states. But if you're able to work that young but don't have and are being taxed and are using public infrastructure, and your tax dollars are directly contributing to that, but you don't have a say in your government, that's a problem. That's a problem not only with labor but just democracy working for people who are directly contributing to it. So that's my answer.
Thank you all for those thoughtful answers. This next question is for Jordan and Mara. How do you respond to skeptics who question whether 16 and 17-year-olds are ready to vote?
Sure. So I don't think that anybody's ready to vote until you get the opportunity to go to the polls. that's when you can step back and realize the power that you have and how important it is to learn about candidates and issues. It isn't as if all of a sudden when you turn 18, you magically develop critical thinking. You know, some people, some adults never develop critical thinking, but we fight for their right to vote, and we want everyone to have a right to vote.
And for me, honestly, I think what I would say is that 18 and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds are not ready to vote either. I've had the privilege of leading the Harvard Votes Challenge last year, trying to mobilize the students on our campus to go out and cast their ballots. And even with people, like the people in this room, incredibly motivated, often highly civically engaged, it was a struggle, especially for all of those states that people are from, where they have to submit absentee ballots. And so if all of these students are struggling with that, a large part of that is because they haven't had the experience. They weren't exposed to, all of the struggles of voting for the first time as 16 or 17-year-olds, where they could have done so from the comfort of their own high school with a polling location right there. And so if we do that with young people who, might not be ready to vote as 16 and 17-year-olds, then I guarantee you we'll have far fewer people who are not ready to vote later on in their lives. So I think that's a key reason. Like, yeah, no one's ready their first time, but we've all got to start somewhere. When better to start than in our own communities growing up?
Thank you, Jordan. This one's for Wilford. It's also my colleague, so I think I know the answer to this question. How does supporting Vote16 align with your organization's broader mission and history of civic engagement?
So Generation Citizens' vision is a world where young people are at the forefront of transforming their democracy to create a more equitable and inclusive country. And Vote16 directly aligns with that mission in that when we talk about what it means to have students civically prepared post high school, we ideally envision introducing them into the public square during high school, right? So when we talk about that public square, we're talking about comprehensive civic education in the classrooms, institutional leadership opportunities for students, so serving on your school board, serving at decision-making levels at the school district level, pre-registration, so to go to Jordan's question actually about pre-registration, right? When we have those strong pre-registration and voter registration infrastructures, it is much easier to introduce young people into the democratic process. But also, lastly, and most importantly, that ability to vote, right? Like several of us have mentioned, right? There's the exercise of voting, right? Like when you vote once, you have the propensity to continue to vote. So if we can do all of that by the time that you're 16 and 17 years old, by the time that you're 8, oh my God, by the time that you're 18 and out of high school, you're already introduced into that public square and already have the tools to engage civically.
Thank you for your great answer. So I was on a meeting with Wilfred last week, so I'm just just having deja vu. This next question is for Laura and Mara. Have you seen examples, either locally or nationally, where youth participation has made a meaningful difference in policy or community outcomes?
Sure. In Brookline, we have a town meeting system of government. And with this town meeting system of government, anybody can submit a warrant article, a law, for lack of a better word, with only 10 signatures. You do not have to be over the age of 18. And we have seen several warrant articles championed by our Brookline High School students. These warrant articles have ranged from things like banning the sale of foie gras within town limits, limiting the sale of fur within town limits. We've also seen Brookline students advocating and championing other initiatives, whether it was being on the front lines to get increased, to do ballot measures to pay for new schools. Our Brookline High students have been actively engaged, and they have come to town meeting, they have given speeches, they have gone through the entire town meeting process, and this has been sort of their babies. We have seen even our youngest members of our town have been involved in politics. Recently, One of our local elementary schools changed its name from Heath to Hayes. Heath had been a slave owner and they wanted to not honor him anymore and instead changed to Hayes, who was a local African-American jazz singer who was fairly influential in the early 20th century. And so these are moments where these students, middle school and high school, have championed, they have made their arguments before town meeting, and they have gotten real policy changes through. And so I think that does show the passion and capability of Brookline High School and middle school students.
Yeah, I similarly in Wellesley with our town meeting, and I mentioned that anyone can run for town meeting regardless of age, has been a great opportunity for youth. And one of the examples of Lena Karush, who last year came to our town meeting in the spring and actually stood up and proposed an amendment to a motion to an article to one of our laws, and managed to sway all of town meeting to support him. So it was a direct example of a youth standing up and changing the outcome of town meeting. I think nationally, we've all seen the involvement of youth really, I think, impacting some of the gun safety laws and climate action, and that kind of work has really come down to the state. In Massachusetts, I think a lot of what we do here, the reason that we have the best gun laws in the country, I think, is partly because of our engagement of our youth.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Jordan, this next one's for you.
Okay.
How can you describe why your organization believes in this being a Harvard Opinion Project? Why they believe that inclusion and youth political representation is essential to a healthy democracy?
Absolutely. So, I mean, there are so many different reasons why this is the case, so many reasons why it's important to have young people be engaged in democracy. And first and foremost, it's what Luana had said earlier. You know, young people have the most stake in all of these issues, especially the ones that are going to become more and more important down the line. So it's true for the case of climate change, it's true for the case of housing, which young people are struggling with so much right now. It's true when we have economic policies that impact jobs. And it's particularly the case when we talk about democratic issues. Not democratic large D as in the party, but democratic small d, in terms of promoting our democracy for the long term. Because, you know, time and time again, we see the importance of having a democratic system that is accountable to the people for, you know, as long as we possibly can, both for the sake of economic goals and also just for the sake of a healthy country and society. And so getting young people involved in that movement as early as possible, getting them to turn out to vote, to write letters to their representatives, to be engaged in that process is so important. And so on our behalf, for Harvard Institute of Politics, and particularly the Harvard Public Opinion Project, it's understanding through the data that we see that it makes a huge difference for young people to be politically engaged. You know, if you're politically engaged as a young person, you are more likely to be in a community. You are more likely to turn out to vote, as you can imagine. You are more likely to not be suffering from mental health problems. You're more likely to be in a relationship even. And so all of these, you know, factors that should seem like they're totally outside of the political realm are in fact deeply connected to it, because it's all connected, right? Being part of civic life is being part of life, and I'm sure everyone here who's involved in local government can definitely agree with that. Your community matters, and engaging with it matters. So on our behalf, I'd say, just like most importantly, be involved in politics, be involved in civics, and, you know, life is much better because of it.
Thanks, Jordan. I'm going to go off script here for one moment and ask a question that sorry, I apologize.
No curveball.
I'm really sorry, but it's one that I think folks have an opinion on. Is there a particular argument that you all think is most persuasive in extending voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds? And if not, that's okay too. Anyone can answer. I'm curious to know the arguments that land well with people who might be skeptical or might really support it, but sort of need that reassurance that this specific argument is like really good. And again, you don't have to answer it, but just posing it as a question.
Yeah, I have like a half-cooked answer, because it builds off kind of what I would say personally motivates me, which is the labor piece. And I've had in my role, I've had the chance to hold some water for Vote 16. And I've had those conversations, right, trying to persuade folks, and I think folks from different political shades tend to agree when you talk to them about those fundamental principles of, like, taxation without representation.
So funny, we're in Boston.
Yeah, right, exactly. The perfect place to have that conversation. But there's a certain appeal with that particular argument that works across different political groups.
Can I piggyback off that? And
Sure.
I don't have stats at the top of my head since this was a curveball. But I think it's important to recognize that our elected officials are going to respond to the people who vote for them. Decisions are made by those who show up. Elderly vote at the highest rate of any demographic. And if you look at the vast amount of money that we spend on supporting policies towards older Americans, whether we're talking about Social Security, whether we're talking about Medicare, we have done a lot to address the needs of Americans elderly, and that is wonderful. Who we have not addressed the needs of are America's youth. Youth are the highest poverty rate in the United States, and yet we don't have those types of policies towards them because they can't vote, right? If we are hurting America's youth, there's no repercussion because the youth can't vote them out. So kind of going on what you're saying, I do think it's an equity justice and I think issue, and it's a way of forcing our elected officials to focus their lens on, I would argue, the neediest and most vulnerable members of our society.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, for me personally, when I first heard about Vote 16 from Anjali here, it's in the crowd, I was a little skeptical. I mean, I've had 16, 17-year-old friends, and it's like, do I really want these people to vote? But since then, I have been convinced both by, number one, the labor piece, which I think is a really effective argument across the aisle, but also just the civic preparedness side of things. And I think back to what really got me involved in youth civic engagement for the first time. It was 2 years ago when I first got involved with the Public Opinion Project at Harvard. And the questions we asked that semester in our poll were focused on, were young people prepared to vote by their high school education? And the results were disastrous. A majority did say that their high school had taught them the importance of voting, which is great, but the actual elements of it, whether that's requesting a ballot or learning how to register to vote, almost all of them were in the mid 30% range. Which is to say, about 2/3 of young Americans, 18 to 29, don't feel like they were at all prepared to vote. So I think that's really important. And then getting back to the piece you also mentioned, Laura, when young people actually do turn out to vote, it can totally change elections. So regardless of where you stand politically, I think it's important to recognize that movements really win and lose on the backs of young people. I mean, just look at the recent mayoral primary election in New York, where youth turnout under age 45, I think, comprised over half of the electorate, something that is unheard of in a municipal primary election. And so the results of things like that are truly extraordinary. So just getting young people out to vote, getting them engaged, and getting what they're due from a labor perspective is just critical.
It's so interesting because the fact that youth could change the election is one of the things that scared people mostly. So it kind of depends on your perspective of what's going on with elections right now. But I want to completely agree. What swayed me and a lot of the people that I interact with in Wellesley when I'm to step forward was the civic engagement piece. I've been very active with youth voters now for a long time, and our board was completely won over. And because we didn't have our study, we couldn't officially support it, but we all as individuals were out there fighting for this because we do look for any way to get people to step up and get involved. And Wellesley, like Brookline, we get like a 23, 24, 25% of the electorate coming out for town elections. It's horrible. And the league is always looking for ways of getting people out. And this idea of getting the youth, getting them a chance to vote, getting them a chance to learn about voting. I mean, Wellesley people want to believe that I'm a parent, I should get to tell my kids what they can do. Well, imagine as a parent that you can be the one that helps your child vote for the first time. And some of us get that opportunity when our kids turn 18, but they go off. So maybe you get to go through one election with your kids, maybe not even one. So that piece of parenting and getting your kids involved, I think really won people over to
That's great, thank you. Last question for the panel, and then I'll open it up for audience questions. What's one thing, and anyone can answer, it's for all of you, what's one thing that you hope this audience will do to advance youth voting rights after today's conversation?
All right, so I'm just gonna, once again, League of Women Voters, you gotta get involved. And I wanna mention this, you gotta write to your state reps. In Massachusetts, that's the most important thing. They have to hear from you, that letter writing campaign. It matters. Write the letters, make the phone calls. It turns out when you call these people, you get their voicemails. And you don't have to actually even talk to somebody, you just leave a message. So it's super easy, do it.
Very similar vein, talk to your friends, get them involved as well. A youth movement is only strong if it's broad-based and not just composed of the most civically engaged people out there. So, tell them why Vote 16 matters. Tell them that they have a chance to vote if this actually happens. And maybe through that, we have a chance to make a difference.
Decisions are made by those who show up, right? That is the motto. And you just keep repeating that and showing up and building that coalition. Reach out to like-minded students in other high schools. If you're part of the debate society at your school, reach out to another school and say, hey, we're debating this idea of Vote 16. Would you be interested in engaging with us? And build momentum and make those phone calls, write letters to the editor of your local newspapers, reach out to your town meeting members, but just keep building and keep showing up.
Yeah, just a huge plus one to what my fellow panelists have said on the engagement piece, on the socializing, like talking about this. One recommendation I usually have, I'm somebody who enjoys history. I'm sure some of my panelists do here as well. But research the suffragist movement. Learn about the movement to lower the voting age from 21 to 18. Read about these things, right? Because and I think that's also in tandem with talking to people about this, because when you first hear lowering the voting age to 16, that's kind of crazy. But then when you first look back at history and see the progress that we made in expanding voting rights, and then you look at some of the research that LaQuan has mentioned, and then you start to talk about it a little more, then it sounds like, hey, maybe this isn't such a crazy idea. Maybe we can get this not only at the municipal level but at the state level. So yeah, look into some history, right? Because there's always lessons to be learned, and at times motivation to be gained from those lessons.
Thank you. Do folks have questions from the audience?
Thanks all for your thoughts. The question on compromise. In Wellesley, we had a defeat, unfortunately, at our last town meeting on the Vote 16 petition. So on Perugia, I think they smartly thought about some changes to the petition coming back before town meeting this year, one of which is to raise the voting age from the proposal, which was 16 to 17. And so I'm wondering if maybe this is more for Juan and Wilfred. Have you seen that in other states where, in order to get something passed, maybe as an initial first step, you've compromised either on the age or on other elements of the proposal?
In Oakland, I think had it just 17 too.
No, but so Oakland. So usually where we see the most amount of compromise is school board only. Mm-hmm. So instead of going for all municipal elections, in some places the appetite for school board is much more strong. There is, and I'm forgetting the name of the country, but there is one of the 23 countries out there that I mentioned earlier. It is 17, not 16. Not that that helps in this context, but that certainly I think is a. If there's more appetite for 17, then I say go for it. You have to play to the political will in the environment that you're in, right? And if getting 17 is much more, attainable, I say go for it. But emphasizing the importance that we're leaving out an entire age that certainly has a lot of meaningful things to contribute, right? So, do you risk like taking more time in getting both 16 and 17, or do you sort of take the win while you can and then continue to work on it?
Yeah, and just like again, a +1 on the political will piece, but also that's also a decision that organizers on the ground have to make. You know, we can you know, from our seats and our positions, kind of come up with like, you know, this is the ideal strategy, but ultimately people on the ground know what's going to work, and if it's moving into 17. And then there's also the question of like, well, do you take the incremental approach, like, you know, starting with 17 and then you work your way down? But again, I think that's a question that has to be decided by the on-the-ground organizers, and of course, Juan and I are going to have our opinions. But again, boots on the ground know what's best when it comes to that. So I'll defer to Tanya.
Thank you.
Oh, I see. No, I'm good.
Well, yeah.
He's just saying he trusts you on it.
Oh, okay.
Great answer, Wilfred. Very good point. Yes.
I have a question for Julie in particular. I saw you brought up Zocron, and I think that's a really good example of like when a candidate really runs on helping youth, they can win. And you think like going forward, more and more candidates, especially if he ends up winning against Como in the election, more and more candidates are gonna really prioritize like social media and young people, or do you think if he loses, it'll kind of be like a fair experiment?
That's a good question. If I had a perfect answer to it, I could probably be making a lot of money from the DNC. Unfortunately, I don't have a perfect answer. That being said, I do think, I mean, first, just looking at polling, because I'm a polling nerd, it seems fairly likely that Mamdani will win the New York City election, especially if current Mayor Eric Adams and Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa stay in the race. If it were a two-way race between Mamdani and Cuomo, it could be close. But that being said, I do think, especially if he does win, we are pretty likely to see a rise in that type of candidate, people who are, you know, politically progressive, but really focusing on the economic side of things. Like there's a candidate for Maine Senate, Graham Plattner, who just announced a couple weeks ago, running in a relatively similar vein in a much less progressive place than New York, so really focusing on the economic side of it. And there are already lots of like copycat video techniques being used across the country. So this is just like the political nerd in me speaking to that. But I do think having that sort of candidate on the ballot, you know, independent of party even, but having someone who can speak to young people, be like, look, I'm young, I feel your pain, you know, rent is high. That does matter. It gets people out to vote. And the combination of both speaking to the issues like that and running a campaign that's very focused on the grassroots side of youth mobilization does lead to much higher youth turnout. So with a little luck, we'll see more stuff like that. I don't know where everyone sits ideologically, but regardless of that, if we have more candidates in that variety, hopefully it'll improve youth civic engagement nationwide. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, this is like a question for those who are like our parents and teachers, but like if we're gonna lower the age to 16, like how would you educate like youths to like vote in like an unbiased way, or like what advice would you give them?
I don't know if unbiased is the word I would go for. I think I would use the word, I think especially, I mean, partisan might be an interesting thing. One of the things that I do in my government classes, I want my students to figure out what their political values are so they can vote their values. I'm not there to tell my students who to vote for. I'm not there to tell them if they're a Democrat or Republican. But what I want to do is systematically take them through the issues they've probably never thought about, and help them figure out where do they fall on the political spectrum. So that means, I think, really having strong civic education. I think civic education has not been, I think across the nation has gone down over the last 20 years, and I think we need to bring that back. So having really frank conversations where we look at all sides of the issues, whether it's on gun control, whether it's on abortion, whether it's on taxation, the future of Social Security, what we think our foreign policy should be. But the more that an individual can grapple with these really hard questions and research it and figure out where they stand, the better prepared they will be to vote their values, which is ultimately, I think, what we want.
So the League of Women Voters, we focus on voter education. It's one of our big areas, and we are trying to educate all voters in Wellesley on all the issues and the candidates. And we certainly hope that if we had younger voters, we would want them to come out and learn from us in the way that we educate everyone. As a parent, I will say that it's interesting, one of the concerns that came up at town meeting last time was that the kids just vote the way their parents do. Well, to be honest, my husband votes exactly the way I tell him to, as do my neighbors who call me and say, who should I vote to? You're the one involved. So that's kind of a normal thing that people vote along with their alliances. But there's a lot of kids out there that once they learn about the issues, will make their own decision as well. So I think as a parent, you know, my goal is to get my kids to the polls. Like honestly, that's what I tried to do. And my kids have voted. I have a 25-year-old and a 21-year-old, and they have voted in every election since they turned 18. And my son even voted in the presidential election when he thought he was going to have didn't matter whatsoever. And I really thought he wasn't going to go. He lives in Newton, so I couldn't even drag him. On the last moment to vote, which in Massachusetts he had 2 weeks or quite a long time to vote, he actually said, "Mom, I need a lift," and at like 7 o'clock on the last night he voted. So I feel like as a parent, my job is to teach the kids that they need to vote, and then hope that yes, they learn their values and vote in a way that works for them in the future.
Sorry, I came a little late, so I'm not sure if this is discussed, but why the age 16?
You're like, why not 14?
Yeah, like why this is the number?
Yeah.
You want me to?
I would just want to say earlier.
That feels like an exactly the right question. But I'm happy to give an answer because I feel like I've been kind of beating the same drum here. I think 16, I'm not sure what the international context is for this, but I can speak to, at least in the United States, 16 is the age that you can drive, right? You can get your license. Usually where most folks can work, I think more than 24 hours per week. I think it varies by state. But it seems like one of those, it is one of those ages where it's your first introduction to adulthood in a sense, right? Like you are starting to take on those responsibilities. And so I think like that is some of the reasoning behind it, but I'll kick it over to my friend LeBron here to see if he has anything else to add.
Anya, why 16?
16-year-olds can do a lot of things. We can drive. We work, yes, so we pay federal taxes. Also, in Wellesley, we can run for office. So Parisha is the town meeting member. I'm a town meeting member. Michael is the first town meeting member. And I think that just speaks to, yeah, we're taking on many responsibilities. And so yes, it's an introduction to adulthood, but also we're trying to address the problem with 18-year-olds, and there's not a lot of voter turnout when it comes to the younger age groups. And so addressing that with the age group with like 16 and 17-year-olds can show results in younger voters, and which can one day be, you know, graduates of the Vote16 movement. So we kind of want to just show that progression and address all issues.
Awesome.
Any other questions from the audience? We have time for maybe one or two more.
So in Leicester, at least, we tried to get out to talk to our council about Vote16, and some of them were at best unresponsive and at worst hostile about the issue. So I had a question, and this could be for anyone, but what tips do you guys have when you're talking to someone, like a politician or even like someone in your community who's not very easily convinced or who just has a very fixed mindset about this issue?
I'll go first on that one. I have found that one of the best ways to really have these conversations first is I always like to think about hopes and fears. The person I am talking to, what is their hopes, what is their fears? So if I'm talking to somebody and their first reaction is, oh my God, 16-year-olds voting, that's gonna end the world. Why? What is their fears, okay? And we've heard some of these fears articulated of students aren't mature enough, or they'll just vote the way their parents tell them to, or whatever. And so trying to really dig deep. So I can tell you that in Brookline, in 2019, we overwhelmingly passed a home rule petition in order to support Vote16. In fact, it was 142 to 71. That home rule petition languished, and so in 2020 and died in committee. So in 2022, we came back with it. That time it failed, and it failed, I think, because we did not think about how that argument with the cons had changed. And so what came up, and we weren't prepared to answer it because we hadn't, I would argue, maybe we hadn't done our homework, I don't know, was we didn't have a good answer. And so the two major, most convincing con arguments that sank Vote 16 in Brookline was one, the right to vote equals a corresponding access to campaigns. And so what that means is right now, 16 and 17-year-olds, their information is not public in campaigns, right? So a candidate running or an organization lobbying about something can't reach out to students, the 16 and 17-year-olds are protected. And the fear was that if we lower the voting age to 16, we would have to make that information public to those campaigns because campaign speech has a higher level of protection. And so this fear that Brookline deals with things like tobacco regulations, cannabis regulations, gun regulations, that those organizations would then start corresponding with our 16 and 17-year-olds, and that was terrifying for many of our members. The other winning argument that I think we need to come up with a counter for was that when we lowered the voting age in 1971 from 21 to 18, along with it came a corresponding lowering of the age of majority. And so protections that we had seen that went up to the age of 21, like foster care through the age of 21, and not being able to get married without parental consent, not being able to get sued, parents having an obligation to house and feed you till you were 21, those got systematically lowered across all the states to 18. And so this argument was saying that if we lowered the voting age to 16, it would result in the adultification of 16 and 17-year-olds. And in that town meeting, we weren't prepared to counter that. So I think one of the things we really have to do is really think about what are all of the fears. And I'm sure that we can counter those. I think we can come up with regulations to protect. I don't think this is insurmountable, but I think really listening to those fears so that we can counter them is probably one of the most important things we can do.
And I just would add to that I think it's a process. So the earlier you can start the conversations, before it becomes like, rather than waiting until it's actually an issue before city council, right? Meeting with them out of context, having coffee or sitting down and telling them what you care about, and getting them thinking about it, starting to socialize it. I think one of the challenges that came up at our town meeting was that actually Anya was like the most prepared person I'd ever seen come to town meeting. No one asked a single question. People came to town meeting with speeches. They'd already decided. And so, I think realizing that decisions are actually made even personally way before the debates, and you want to be in there having your conversations as early as possible. That's a great point.
That was helpful. that was really helpful. We have time for one more question. All right, let's give it up for our panel.